else. Next witness, please.
State calls Jessica Crawford to the stand.
Good afternoon. If you're willing and able to and feel you can safely and responsibly testify without a mask, that would be the preference if you can.
I can.
Thank you so much. If you would stand, my clerk will administer the oath.
Do you solemnly swear affirm the testimony you're about to give in this matter is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Thank you. Go right ahead.
Good afternoon. Could you please state your full name for the record and spell both your first and last name?
Jessica Crawford, JESSICA
How are you employed?
I am a firearms and tool mark examiner with the Wisconsin State Crime Lab, Milwaukee Laboratory.
And what do you do as a firearms and tool mark examiner?
We examine firearms and firearm-related evidence to determine if the fired evidence was fired either in the same firearm or a particular firearm.
And how long have you been employed with this crime lab?
As a firearms examiner,
Yes.
approximately 5 years.
And did you hold any positions before you were a firearms examiner?
Yes, I did.
And what were those positions?
I was a forensic program technician.
And, okay. What is your educational background and specialized training that allows you to be a firearms examiner?
I have a Bachelor's of Science from Fort Hays State University. I have also trained in the Milwaukee Crime Lab Firearms and Tool Mark Examiner Training Program. This is a modular apprenticeship training program.
I'm going to show you two exhibits, Exhibit 403 and Exhibit 404. How would you identify Exhibit 403?
This is my statement of qualifications.
And that's what the crime lab uses instead of a curriculum vitae, is that right?
That is correct.
Okay, I would move Exhibit 403 into evidence.
No objection.
It is received.
And in this case, did you write a report?
Yes, I did.
Okay, and I'm going to show you what has been marked as Exhibit 404. Is that in fact a true and accurate copy of the report that you wrote in this case?
Yes, this is.
I would move Exhibit 404 into evidence at this time.
No objection.
It is received.
So when you say you're a firearms examiner, what does that mean you actually do?
When we receive firearms or firearm-related evidence into the crime lab, we examine the firearms to ensure their functionality, make sure that they work as they are intended, and test fire those firearms. When we receive fired evidence, which would be things like cartridge cases and bullets, we examine that evidence for characteristics that are both the class characteristics and individual microscopic characteristics that would allow us to determine if they were fired in the same firearm or if they were fired in a particular firearm.
And what are you looking for when you're looking at, for example, a casing that was fired and comparing it to another casing fired from a known weapon? What exactly are you looking for?
So we're looking at the markings that are left on the fired cartridge case from the firearm. We would be looking at impressions or striations that are left by things like the breech face, the firing pin, the ejector, the extractor, the chamber. These are all areas that we would look at in order to determine if they were fired in the same firearm or from a particular firearm.
So does each firearm leave unique characteristics on a casing?
Yes, it does.
So you can match them up in theory. If you have the weapon and you have the casing that was shot from it, you should be able to match them.
Correct, you should be able to.
Okay. Did you examine any evidence in this case?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And specifically, did you examine a firearm in this case?
Yes, I did.
Okay. As the detective gloves up and gets the firearm, I'm first going to show you it's now been put into a secure carton, but if you want to look at that, does this have markings from you or your lab?
So when an item is accepted into the crime lab or submitted to the crime lab, we will give it its own unique crime lab number, and each item will receive its own unique crime lab identifier. So in this instance, there is a barcode label. That barcode label has the unique crime lab case number of M21-1575, and this is item AL.
And I think the detective is going to approach it. And Ms. Crawford, is this the weapon that you fired in connection and marked AL?
Yes, it is.
Thank you, Detective. And in this case, were you also given a casing to examine, specifically Exhibit 284, a casing found in the Halderson home in the basement floor?
Yes, I was.
And so when you had the firearm and you were given this casing, what did you do to examine both items?
So in the examination process, once again, I function tested the firearm to make sure that it worked, that there was no damage, and that it could safely function. I functioned these safeties in order to make sure that they function as intended. And then I performed test fires of the firearm. I then took those test-fired cartridge cases and I compared them microscopically on a tool we call the comparison microscope. A comparison microscope is a microscope that is two microscopes connected by one optical bridge. What this allows for me is that I can look at those two objects simultaneously. So that was performed in order to look at those individual markings that were left over from the firearm.
And in this case, did you compare Exhibit 284 to the test rounds that you fired from the weapon? Did you say AL?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I did.
And what did you conclude in your examination?
I was able to determine that this test-fired cartridge, or this cartridge case, was fired in item AL.
And how did you come to that conclusion?
I came to that conclusion based on the different microscopic markings that I was able to identify in the breech face, the firing pin, and the ejector.
And was this case peer-reviewed and verified?
Yes, it was.
And what does that mean for your conclusion to be peer-reviewed and verified?
Peer review is when a second qualified examiner takes the paperwork and reviews it to determine that it is accurate and complete. And a verification is when a second qualified examiner takes the evidence, performs an examination, and confirms that my conclusions and the evidence are matching.
So to put it simply, a second pair of eyes looks at the data and the results and sees if they agree or not.
Yes, and the physical evidence itself.
Okay. And are all of your conclusions here today to a reasonable degree of professional certainty as practiced within your field?
Yes.
And is the lab that you work for, the Wisconsin Crime Lab, is it accredited?
Yes, it is an accredited lab.
And what does that mean?
That means that a third party oversees our policies and procedures in order to ensure that we are meeting or exceeding industry standards.
Okay, nothing further.
Cross-examination.
None, thank you.
May this witness be excused.
Yes, and released.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a good rest of your day.